The mud of no man's land didn't just cling to the boots, it felt alive, a cold and greasy slickness that smelled of sulfur, rot, and ancient, unwashed sin. Brother soldier Caleb leaned heavily against the rotting timber supports of the fire step, the cold grime of the trench wall seeping through his heavy woolen greatcoat. He took a long, slow drag from his cigarette. The ember flared bright, casting a brief, harsh glow over the holy script painstakingly inked across his forearms, and the heavy iron crosses welded to his battered helmet. Behind him, the horizon was a bruised, bleeding red, not the gentle dawn of God's creation, but the jagged, burning tear of the abyssal sky bleeding into the mortal realm. In the distance, the skeletal ruins of an ancient cathedral stood like broken teeth against the smog, a reminder of what they were fighting to keep from tumbling completely into the dark. The trench was quiet, save for the wet thwack of a rat scurrying through the puddles and the low, rhythmic chanting of the squad's priest a few bays down, consecrating the day's ammunition. Caleb looked down at his bolt-action rifle resting against the sandbags. Its barrel was wrapped in purity seals, the parchment tattered and stained with foul water. He blew a stream of gray smoke into the stagnant air. The waiting was always the worst part. It gave a man time to think, and in the trench crusade, thinking was a dangerous luxury. It allowed the mind to wander to the things that screamed in the dark just beyond the barbed wire, things that used to be men before the heresy took them. Then the air changed. The pressure dropped so suddenly Caleb's ears popped. The ambient hum of the wasteland fell utterly silent. The smoke from his cigarette didn't drift, it hung frozen. From leagues away, a sound vibrated not through the air, but through the marrow of his bones. It was a chorus of 1,000 weeping voices, twisted and magnified into a deafening, mechanical shriek. The abyssal artillery. Incoming, the watchman's cry echoed down the line, cut short by the frantic clanging of an iron bell. Caleb didn't panic. His movements were mechanical, drilled into him by years of holy war. He took one last, deep drag, dropped the cigarette into the dark mud, and crushed it beneath his heel. He grabbed his rifle, checking the heavy iron sight. The sky above the ruined cathedral split open, raining down shells of blackened iron and screaming flesh. The morning bombardment had begun. Caleb pressed his back tight against the trench wall, closed his eyes, and began to pray. The first shells didn't detonate with the world-shaking roar of high explosives. Instead, they hit the earth with a wet, heavy thud, splitting open like overripe fruit. Caleb braced for the concussion, but it never came. Instead, a thick, greasy hiss began to fill the air. Through the billowing smoke, a rolling cloud of greenish-yellow vapor began to pour over the lip of the trench. It didn't drift like smoke. It slithered, heavy and dense, hugging the mud and filling the craters. Caleb's eyes widened as he saw a stray rat scramble out of a puddle directly into the path of the fog. The moment the vapor touched the creature, its fur dissolved into smoke. The rat let out a silent, bubbling shriek as its skin peeled back in wet, bloody ribbons, exposing raw muscle and bone before it melted into a gelatinous slurry. Lazarus gas. It was the flaying fog of the abyss, a demonic concoction designed not just to suffocate, but to liquefy mortal flesh upon contact. Standard gas masks were useless. The vapor would eat right through the rubber and filters in seconds. Caleb's blood ran colder than the mud beneath him as a sickening realization took hold. He knew what happened to the fallen. The gas wouldn't just kill a man. The abyss would harvest the peeled, dissolved flesh, absorbing it into the warp to be cured, and used to decorate the unholy armor of the heretic legions. To die here was to have your very skin worn as a trophy by the damnation you fought against. Gas flaying gas, Caleb roared, his voice cracking with sudden raw terror. To the altar, break for the sanctuary. All down the line, panic erupted. Soldiers scrambled over one another, abandoning their rifles and gear. The standard military discipline vanished, replaced by the primal urge to survive. Caleb didn't look back. He bolted down the duckboards, his heavy boots splashing through the filthy water. Behind him, he watched in horror as his closest comrades stumbled and fell. Their heavy canvas uniforms scorched and blackened, crumbling to ash as the vapor touched them. Then, right before his eyes, their flayed skin peeled away in wet, agonizing strips, lifted by an unnatural force, and was violently sucked upward into the churning green gas cloud. The agonizing screams of the men ended in choking gurgles as they were stripped to the bone. He could feel the air growing hot behind him. The edges of his woolen greatcoat began to fray and smolder where the stray tendrils of vapor brushed against the fabric. A droplet of condensation from the gas hit the back of his exposed neck, and a white-hot spike of agony shot through his spine. He hissed, pushing himself harder, his lungs burning. At the end of the trench line, embedded into the reinforced concrete of a massive command bunker, stood the altar of the Iron Saint. It was a holy sanctuary, its perimeter ringed with heavy bronze incense burners, throwing off thick white smoke consecrated by the high clergy. The holy incense created a pressurized barrier of divine warding, the one thing capable of pushing back the foul chemistry of the pit. Caleb rounded the final traverse. He could see the warm, golden glow of the altar's candles ahead. The white smoke of the incense was a wall of salvation just 20 paces away, but the green fog was faster. It was cascading over the trench walls right beside him, cutting off his path, reaching out like skeletal fingers. With a desperate, wordless cry, Caleb threw his body forward in a frantic, sliding dive, scrambling through the mud, praying to whatever saints were listening that he would make the gap before the fog claimed his flesh. The white, consecrated incense billowed thickly from the bronze burners, clashing violently with the approaching nightmare. As Caleb skidded across the threshold of the sanctuary, the wall of holy smoke pushed back against the chemical tide, holding the line just feet from the concrete bunker. He lay gasping on the wet earth, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, staring out at the perimeter. The Lazarus gas didn't disperse. Denied entry to the holy ground, it began to pool and swell, slithering along the edges of the incense barrier until it completely encircled the altar. It rose up in a towering, roiling wall of sickly green, trapping him within a small island of fading light. Then the fog began to change. It was no longer just a cloud of weaponized chemistry, the vapor twisted into agonizingly familiar shapes. Inside the translucent green current, Caleb saw faces stretching out of the mist. They were the men of his platoon who had been caught in the trenches, their features half-melted, eyes wide with eternal terror. Beside them were older, ancient terrors, the weeping. Tormented souls of the heresy, bound to the dark whims of the abyss. They writhed within the fog, hands grasping fruitlessly against the unseen wall of the incense. Cold sweat broke out across Caleb's brow, cutting tracks through the grime on his face. Clasping his trembling hands together, he fell to his knees before the candles and began to lament, his voice cracking with desperation. "O holy saint of the iron line, shield thy servant from the pit," Caleb prayed, his voice a ragged whisper. "Deliver me from the corruption of the flesh, cleanse this air with thy divine fury, and grant me the strength to endure the malice of the unholy." From the surrounding wall of gas, a chorus of discordant voices answered. It wasn't a roar, but a collective scraping hiss that echoed directly inside his skull. The souls in the fog began to weep, their sobs twisting into a cruel, mocking laughter. He praised to a silent heaven. A voice wailed, its tone mimicking the frantic cadence of Caleb's own squad leader. "Look at the faithful little dog, shivering in his kennel," another spirit mocked, its face pressing flat against the invisible barrier, bubbles of green fluid popping across its spectral lips. "Your saint is dust, soldier. Your prayers are just breath thrown into the furnace. The fog always wins. It will eat your skin, it will drink your eyes, and then you will dance in the green with us." The laughter grew louder, a deafening, echoing taunt that threatened to drown out the low, steady hum of the burning incense. Caleb pressed his forehead against the cold, wet concrete of the altar, closing his eyes tight as the tormented spirits pressed closer to the line, waiting for the candles to burn out. The mocking laughter reached a deafening crescendo, the spectral faces in the green fog distending and snapping like wolves at the edge of the light. The incense smoke was beginning to thin, the bronze burners sputtering under the sheer weight of the abyssal pressure. Caleb knew his breath was running out. With a trembling, mud-slicked hand, he reached beneath his frayed greatcoat and tore at the heavy leather pouch hanging around his neck. Inside lay his most sacred possession, a relic given to him upon his ascension to the brother soldiers. A jagged, splintered fragment of the true cross, preserved through centuries of holy war. He ripped the pouch open and grasped the splinter barehanded. The artifact didn't feel like wood, it felt like jagged, frozen lightning. The raw, divine energy radiating from the relic immediately tore into his skin. As he squeezed his fist shut around it, the sharp edges bit deep into his palm. Crimson blood, mortal, flawed, but fiercely loyal, welled up from his hand, soaking the ancient wood. He didn't scream. He welcomed the pain. It was a clean, sharp agony, entirely unlike the foul, dissolving rot of the Lazarus gas. As his blood covered the splinter, the relic flared to life. Blinding, needle-thin rays of pure, golden light began to pierce through the seams of his clenched fingers. The light grew instantly, bursting outward from his hand in brilliant, geometric beams that cut through the thick, white incense smoke. Where the holy light struck the wall of gas, the tormenting spirits didn't just fade, they shrieked in genuine, agonizing terror. The mocking laughter turned into a panicked wail as the golden rays tore through the emerald mist like sunbeams shattering ice. The roiling, suffocating circle of the flaying fog was violently thrown backward, unraveling into nothingness as the divine light swept across the trench line. Within seconds, the suffocating pressure lifted. The air around the altar cleared, leaving only the smell of burnt ozone and the quiet, heavy breathing of a soldier still holding the line. Caleb opened his eyes, his bleeding hand still glowing faintly in the dawn, looking out over a trench that was, for now, completely silent.